Nice to see you again. Well, nice to actually know that you're probably somewhere there. My name is Olga Bolotina, and I'm happy to present to you In the Know again, the conversation series with environmental and sustainability leaders. And today I have amazing guest, Wade Higgins. And last week we kind of geeked out a little bit on clean energy, and I think we're continuing in that vein. So Wade is working in electrical vehicle infrastructure and electrical vehicle. We sort of had a conversation yesterday. I was like, oh my God, I'm really looking forward to this discussion today because it's sort of going on, especially in the light what's going on in the state right now, the executive order that was just passed by Governor of California. So really looking forward to this conversation. Wade has been working in electric vehicle infrastructure since his early days in Tesla, right?
Yep.
Before Tesla became a huge company. So very curious to find out how it all started and what happened there. So Wade, you're an entrepreneur in electrical infrastructure and started your own company, software company, which I'm actually curious to find out a little bit more what the company does and what are the, sort of ways forward. And also you are also a fellow that just graduated from Clean Energy Leadership Institute.
Yep.
And very exciting because you were working on the project proposing to do EV stations, electrical vehicle charging stations throughout national parks, which is amazing. I love it. So
Yep.
It's one of those, chicken and the egg. And I remember when we my partner and I were deciding between vehicles, which vehicle to buy. I was like, well, we live in an apartment building, so we don't have electrical vehicle charging stations. So it's like, we want electrical. We were like, So anyway, excited to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, let's just jump in because I usually always curious actually, why did you get into that field, into this industry? You shared that you grew up in Bay Area, but and your parents are lawyers. You decided not to go into
that's it. Yeah, that's definitely right. I figured there had to be a way to make the ends meet and reach your financial goals, but not just work 80 hours a week consistently. I definitely didn't see my parents too much when they were both working full-time as lawyers, and I decided maybe I don't want to do that myself as well. But yeah, obviously I'm talking to you, so I would definitely describe myself as an environmentalist. I think that started pretty early. Tesla certainly helped inform that, but I feel like that really more informed, a lot of the technical details and the sort of how, if you will, of having a clean energy future, which I'm sure we're going to talk a whole lot more here about. But I would actually say I sort of started to get curious about energy and environmentalism pretty early. I spent a lot of time as a kid and teenager mountain biking and backpacking and hiking, and being fortunate that I grew up in the Bay Area. Yosemite was never very far away. Lake Tahoe was never very far away. And these, in my mind, are some of the most beautiful places on the planet. And I really like going there and spending time.
Do you bike there?
My mountain biking days are largely behind me nowadays, but Tahoe has some fantastic mountain biking as well. And even just, the Santa Cruz Mountains here in the Bay Area on the peninsula, like there's hundreds of miles of hiking trails that one can enjoy. So I think I spent a lot of time in the outdoors early on, and that's what really made me appreciate it. There's plenty of photos out there of me hugging trees. I'll own that all day long. So, that's sort of what made me appreciate our beautiful environment that we have. And considering that we had a day of nuclear winter earlier this year, I'd like to really do everything I can to prevent that from happening in the future and make it so that 30, 50, 80 years from now, Tahoe and Yosemite still look beautiful, and they still are places that people who are like-minded can go enjoy. But when I was in college, I started to get sort of curious about some of the more detailed mechanics of energy as well. I wrote my senior thesis on the political ramifications of China and the United States oil procurement strategies, just because China and the United States are far and away the largest users of oil out there. You know, and at least back in 2013, the strategy was largely the United States did prefer to do business with more democratic players, but more than half of the oil imports for the United States come from our neighbors to the north and south and from the Americas as well. So we actually thankfully do get a whole lot less of our oil than I think is perceived from the Middle East and from other authoritarian regimes. And being honest, China really doesn't care. You offer enough supply and good price, China will buy from anyone. And that was true in 2013. I don't know if that's still true now, but you know, that was an interesting sort of foray into, you know, here's how you can tie in global politics. I was an international affairs major. Here's how you can tie that in to energy. And then I started working at Tesla and started to geek out about batteries and electric cars and EV infrastructure, and haven't changed away from that since.
Wow. Well, and you also mentioned that you're working with UK and businesses. I'm curious about that. But just one thing, I was like, we didn't have actual nuclear winter. If people are watching it 20
Yes.
years from now, just FYI, it was just a really bad, terrible day, really, that looked like
nuclear winter.
I guess nuclear winter would look like, and like Mars, I guess.
Yeah. There was no radioactivity, thankfully. Just
hopefully.
Yeah, just the sun being blotted out.
Yeah, there's just no sun every day, all day long, and yeah, it was dark. So yeah, it was kind of scary. Where in Bay Area do you live?
So I currently am living in San Mateo, so sort of just not dead middle, but pretty close to the middle of the peninsula. I previously lived in Palo Alto, Menlo Park area as well. You know, I grew up north of San Francisco in Marin County. And Marin is beautiful, but it's definitely a bubble within a bubble. And I sort of decided I want to get out and just try something different. So that's why I ended up going to school up in Portland, Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. And I loved Portland, but it made me realize how awesome the Bay Area is. And then I kind of wanted to come back. And I was lucky enough to work for Tesla at the time, who is headquartered in Palo Alto. So that facilitated an easy move to Palo Alto, and I've stayed in the area ever since.
Well, and you're an entrepreneur, so yeah, it's kind of a bubble within the bubble, as you said, for entrepreneurs. Because last year I was lucky enough to get into some startups, and oh my God, this completely different culture. Presentation constantly, and assessment, investor. It's a whole different world. Also, very exciting, actually. So,
absolutely,
ideas flowing. So
yeah,
absolutely. But I want to talk about your business a little bit, just because I think it's such
Which one?
topic. Well, how many do you have?
I mean, at the present moment, it's just sort of one side hustle, if you will. But I'm always, sort of looking for more opportunities, because this is Silicon Valley and there's a lot of really interesting, cool stuff going on. And if you can be involved, why wouldn't you? So, and like, I think
main hustle then. What is the main hustle?
Well, no, the main hustle is temporary retirement at the present moment. But
nice.
yeah, no, I mean, as I mentioned, there's always opportunity around here, and it's pretty easy to get involved, especially if you know people who are working on cool stuff. So that's always something that gets me up out of bed in the morning and keeps me interested.
Yeah, that's actually important, because I'm also into sort of personal development psychology. It's like, what does get you out of bed in the morning, especially now? What are the big ideas? So are you working the thing that you mentioned, the project that you work with, then the Clean Energy Institute, which is happened just recently, from my understanding. Are you pursuing that idea to install electrical vehicle charging stations within the parks, or
being honest, that is something of interest for me, but we alluded to this in one of our previous conversations as well. I think a lot of that really is going to be dictated by sort of like what the future of this country looks like, and
in a month from now.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I say that because I have a number of friends who are involved in helping to shape Biden's climate plans, and what what are we going to do? What would climate and energy look like under a Biden administration? And this is probably not news to you at all, but they're talking about a $2 trillion infrastructure package, $500 billion a year. That's sort of on the same order of magnitude as what FDR did with the New Deal. That could be just a major boom for the US economy and pump lots of jobs available. But, if that much money is available, then that makes me much more likely to actually pursue a project like that, because there's more of a culture that says, yes, we want this, we value this, let's do this. There's funding available. Obviously, you can't do much without funding. So, the Biden administration wouldn't be the exclusive source of funding for a project like this, but I'd be a whole lot more encouraged and feel like I had a much greater likelihood of success under a Biden administration for something like that. So again, I feel like it's boring, but it's kind of a wait and see strategy for right now. But and also I've been talking to Rivian, and for those of you not familiar with it, Rivian is another electric vehicle startup. They're actually focusing exclusively on building trucks and larger SUVs, which, if you've lived in the United States for any amount of time, are pretty damn popular here. And they have $6 billion in funding, and they have backing from both Ford and Amazon. So they have pretty good chances here. And, that brand is sort of organized around this idea of, like, there are people like me who are environmentalists, who are outdoors enthusiasts, who want to go to places like Yosemite and Tahoe and Zion and Yellowstone and Great Smoky Mountains, and like list any cool outdoorsy place in the United States that you want. And they're interested in making electric vehicles that are capable and can go to those places. And I really love that idea, because that's sort of one more feather in the cap for EVs of, yeah, if you have a 400-mile range truck that can go off-roading, in some of the most extreme environments here, the excuse of EVs can't do this, EVs can't do that, just largely doesn't exist. But Rivian has a lot of the same goals as I do, in the sense that they expect some of their owners to literally take these deep off-road, and there's no charging stations out there, obviously. And so Rivian has actually talked about wanting to put charging stations in parks, at trailheads, to make it so that it's possible to do a lot of adventures like this. And I mentioned Amazon as a backer. Jeff Bezos has his climate fund that's talking about offering money for nonprofits to do this sort of stuff as well. So there's definitely a lot of crossover. If I can get a job at Rivian and work there and also pursue this, that's, sort of two birds with one stone in my mind. And I'd really enjoy that. But if I don't go to work for Rivian, then yeah, I might strike out and do this on my own.
Oh, well, that's exciting. I mean, you mentioned so many things to unpack. The administration, obviously, yes, it's going to be a completely different future. One scenario or the other, and I think that in both scenarios, I was like, the climate cannot really wait. So I absolutely hear you that with Biden administration probably is going to be much more opportunity, and also, I'm thinking about there's people constantly trying to sort of jobs versus environment. It was like, well, if you invest in the right things and clean energy, there are going to be a lot of clean energy jobs. And yes, some people, but also you can invest in training people or retraining people to transition from one job to another and one economy to another. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities there, and obviously for entrepreneurs like you. Well, and if everything stays the same, I think that the fight is going to be so much more intense, and it's still needed. And I think that it's so important that leaders like Bezos and companies, big companies, really coming on board and realizing that we all live on this planet that is, pollution is not going anywhere, plastics are not going anywhere, fumes are not going anywhere. So I think that's really exciting, and they really are the ones who can pivot fast and implement all of those things.
Well, and Google has been a exemplary example in that they have been procuring clean energy for their facilities for years, and they've made strong commitments to 100% renewables. In some cases, they're literally funding the construction of microgrids or of solar plants, of wind farms. So Google, and granted, Google's one of the wealthiest companies on the planet. They certainly have the resources to do this, but they have been a really excellent example of setting sort of the corporate tone of saying, like, yes, individual consumers can ask for this, but traditionally large companies are much bigger consumers of electricity. So, they've said, we're going to do this. There's plenty of instances of heavy industry where they're massive consumers of power. And, and in some cases, like I think about sort of a lot of the metal manufacturing in this country, and they're going to need combustion-based fuel sources for a while, just because they need some pretty extreme heats that you can't generate, even with concentrated solar. Now we're getting there. There is technological developments that are getting it so that we can concentrate solar energy to achieve 1,000 degrees Celsius as well. But there are going to be plenty of things that will be a slower transition to, not relying on combustion-based fuels. And that's okay. I think that's, that's something that we're cognizant of, and there will be technological development that will enable that in the future. But I'm obviously very gung-ho about electric vehicles. And I think that ground transportation is something that certainly in California, we now have a pretty solid roadmap to get there. Many other countries that are more serious about tackling climate change have roadmaps to completely electrify the sector, and that's fantastic. But if you talk about some other sources of transportation out there, like I don't know that we're going to have scaled commercial electric flight in our lifetimes. Like I can see niche applications of that popping up here and there, and there will be the ability.
You mean airplanes?
Yeah, I mean airplanes. That's exactly correct. I don't envision there being an electric 747 that can cross the Pacific or cross the Atlantic, during my lifetime.
I don't like to hear that. I want to go to Russia and fly, and not to have to offset.
The silver lining of this, Olga, is that if you look at sort of transportation as an entire industry and where the emissions come in, ground-based vehicles are far and away the biggest emitters out there. And so electrifying cars and heavy trucks, and even like semi-trucks, class 8s that haul a lot of freight, that is substantially more impactful than electrifying commercial aircraft. Because even though, like if you think about a flight across the Atlantic from the United States to Moscow, yeah, like there's a lot of carbon emissions that come off of that single one flight. But if you look at the total number of miles that people drive in gas-powered vehicles every day, it's, airplanes are a drop in the bucket. So,
well, especially now, probably, with pandemic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, the pandemic has been a reduction sort of across the board, because people are driving less, people are flying less, like, people are just not using combustion-based machines to travel as much at this present moment because people aren't traveling as much. But I think that, if you look past COVID and you look again 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the future, if we fully electrify ground-based transportation, that's going to have a really, really meaningful impact on reducing CO2 emissions. And, like the fact that we have challenges of getting there with planes and boats, those do exist, but those two, like all emissions that come from boats and all emissions that come from planes, amount to less than 10% of all transportation emissions out there. So, like I like the idea of getting to 100%, but even getting to 90% is really impactful, and we can do that now. And, like we should be establishing roadmaps to get there in the next 10 to 20 years.
So when you're talking about roadmaps, you're talking about California, I'm assuming that.
So California is the latest and most obvious example to announce, sort of a sunsetting of combustion-based transportation, which is really great. But, even though California is a leader here in the United States has hardly been a leader on this recently. And if you look at a number of other largely European countries, they're way further ahead. Like Norway has always been very progressive about sort of getting away from using combustion-based fuels for everything. And they're now at the point where Norway, more than 50% of all of their vehicle sales are electrified. And there's a number of incentives that go into that. I think the culture supports it. They have fantastic charging infrastructure up there. There are substantial government subsidies available to get EVs. There's no VAT, which is huge for a country like Norway, but also there's free parking everywhere for electric vehicles.
VAT?
A value-added tax.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm lost in abbreviations.
No worries. But I mean, but so, like the Norwegians kind of get it. They're like, okay, these electric cars have all these perks that gas cars don't get. They cost less to run. With the government grants, they cost less to buy, and there's no tax on them. Like, why on earth would you get a gas car? And so Norway has sort of gone very full steam ahead on this, and that's fantastic. The problem is that the entire population of Norway is equivalent to the Bay Area. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge country. But like even countries like China have established regulations of, we want to sunset combustion at least in urban areas for certain applications. 90%, more than 90% of all electric buses on the planet are in operation in China. There's a number of other European countries, including the UK, Netherlands, who have announced dates where you cannot sell a new gas vehicle after that date. Most of these are sometime between 2030 and 2040. A few are a little bit more aggressive than that, but you're seeing these targets, and you're starting to see ramp ups of electric vehicle sales, and you're starting to see demand increases, and you're seeing drops in CO2 as a result of that. These are all good things.
Well, and also, of course, the grid, how we power the grid matters immensely. So
Absolutely.
China retiring their coal plants in combination of implementing the electric vehicle infrastructure
Yep.
has a big impact. In California also, it makes a huge difference because I don't know the numbers. You probably do more than I. The percentage of power that comes from clean energy versus dirty fuel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the grid obviously makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So I think that yeah.
And that's something that I think is really cool about electric vehicles, is that they can actually get cleaner over time. I mean, obviously EVs produce.
Oh, you mean the cleaner the grid, the cleaner the vehicle?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that most people are aware that EVs produce zero tailpipe emissions. But yes, there are emissions associated with an electric vehicle, unless you're charging it from exclusively solar or wind power. Yeah, there are emissions associated with it, but it's drastically lower. And that's the cool thing, is that you can have a 10-year-old EV, and it can get cleaner over time as the grid mix in your state changes. You can sort of take that into your own hands. If you own your own home and you throw a solar panel up on it and you start charging off of that, then literally you're driving on sunlight. There's no emissions associated with that. And that's, I think, the end goal. So gas cars can't do that. A gas car, its engine is as efficient as possible and as good as it's going to be on day one, and it typically only gets worse from there. And EVs can get better over time, which is in my mind, massive advantage. But sort of to swing back to the power mix that you were talking about, California, we get about 60% of our power from clean sources. There's a sort of distinction between clean and renewable, because nuclear energy, for example. Yeah, exactly. And like, I'm pro nuclear. I will go ahead and say it right now. I think nuclear is a good, it is. I don't think it should exist forever, because I do envision a grid in the future where we really can get almost 100% of our power from solar and wind with battery storage, maybe a little bit of geothermal energy in there as well. But as a transition tech, nuclear energy should be around for decades to come. It is cleaner than natural gas. Natural gas is the cleanest of the combustion-based fuels, but we should be shutting down natural gas plants before we should be shutting down nuclear plants. So California is more than half of our energy is coming from clean sources, and that includes both nuclear and renewables. But I had a lot of training on this when I worked at Tesla, because this was a question that we had to be able to answer for people. And I really like the case of West Virginia or Hawaii, because West Virginia gets more than 90% of their power from coal. Obviously, like, coal is very tied to the economy in West Virginia. It's a cultural thing as well. Coal is not going away in West Virginia anytime soon. And so if you drive an electric car in West Virginia, you can just argue, oh, you drive a coal-fired car, and that's bad. But even in those sorts of instances where you're driving an electric vehicle off of a dirty power source, again, it can get cleaner over time if the grid mix changes. But also, power plants that are combustion based have a lot of pretty sophisticated tech to try and limit CO2 coming out. And even then, it's typically concentrated in one area far away from population centers. And so even if you're running an electric vehicle in West Virginia, where it's 90+% coal, or you're running an electric vehicle in Hawaii that actually gets a lot of its power from oil-fired power plants. They literally ship oil in and burn it for power. Obviously, Hawaii, yeah.
In Hawaii with the sunlight.
But Hawaii is gaining a lot of its energy from wind and solar right now. And I do think that the Hawaiians sort of recognize, like, okay, we have one of the dirtiest, least reliable, most expensive grids in the United States. And if we build massive amounts of solar and wind with battery storage, we can transition that to one of the most secure, cleanest, and cheapest grids as well. So, you know, Hawaii is definitely on the road to getting there. But yeah, I mean, like there are oil-fired power plants in Hawaii. And so there's literally just, you can think of it as one big gas engine that powers the grid there. And even running an electric vehicle on that, because you're concentrating the pollution somewhere else and you've got all those scrubbers to maintain it, it's still better than everybody individually driving around in their own gas cars. Like, it's still better for the grid. But, you know, and then once you start to get to renewable sources or cleaner sources of power, I mean, again, you run an electric vehicle off of a nuclear power plant, it's fantastically clean. There are, you know, aside from nuclear waste, there is pretty much no gaseous emissions going into the, yeah. And like, again, nuclear waste is a problem there. That is definitely the case. But, you know, if you have to pick one of the poisons, you know, nuclear energy does not contribute to climate change.
Well, I guess, you know, I mean, you have to also, it's interesting, you know, to look at all of those things and cultural perspectives and backgrounds. And because, you know,
Totally.
I grew up in Russia, so, you know, Chernobyl was something absolutely real that happened for, you know, and affected my family because
absolutely,
you know, part of my family is in Ukraine and part of my family is in Belarus, and the radioactive clouds and rain came to Belarus. I mean, we measured the radioactivity around my grandmother's you know, country house, and it was really, really high. So my niece and my aunt with her with my nieces and nephews had to come to St. Petersburg and live with us for a few years because you know, she had my niece was newborn basically.
Yeah, you don't want radioactivity.
So I think so I think that a lot of things that when we're discussing also are affected by personal experiences. So yes, in the moment when everything goes well, nuclear is definitely much more clean energy than coal or natural gas. And if something goes wrong, the repercussions are humongous.
Oh yeah, no,
yeah. So I mean, that's to say, not to sort of, I don't want to go maybe that road here because we can just spend the whole, you know, time just debating nuclear. But I mean, there are obviously trade-offs, and you have to calculate what are the, you know, trade-offs, you know, and
absolutely. A company I previously worked for, my CEO there his family he'd grown up in Ukraine, and the Chernobyl incident was the impetus for them to move to the United States. And, you know, he started a company that was working on energy storage and EV chargers as well. And he absolutely cited that as an inspiration of, like, you know, like, I'm into energy. I had this lived experience. Granted, he was an infant at the time, but exactly like what you're talking about, you don't want an infant growing up in an area with radioactivity. So I 100% hear you and understand that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and also, you know, something that you mentioned about coal plants and localized. I was like, wow, it's interesting, but we talk about CO2 emissions, but also when coal burns, there's so many other pollutants and toxins that are released. Yes, of course, if they managed correctly the stack, then they captured for the most part, but still a lot of pollutants are going to there.
Well, and you know, like, I agree, there's a big focus on CO2. Methane is in some regards worse. So yeah, no, I'm
yes.
Yeah.
We're talking.
Well, you know, this is why I like electric vehicles, solar, wind, and batteries. There's no sort of, you know, real negative side effects that come with that. You know, like, yes, there is emissions associated with manufacturing, and there are some supply chain problems with sourcing nickel and cobalt and manganese and lithium, all of these metals that go into batteries. But that is improving. And again, even then, I'd rather have a lithium mine than a coal-fired power plant.
So what are the technologies, the latest technologies right now? I mean, in the storage, which is important, and also, another question that I have with infrastructure is infrastructure. How do you create that infrastructure, and how much resources does it take? You can stick with the battery latest technologies first. I know I asked
Sure.
two questions in one.
So I think like one of the, now that this industry is a fair bit more mature than it was even a few years ago, battery costs are coming down pretty substantially, and you're getting to the point where what we call VPPs, virtual power plants, are very competitive at bidding. And virtual power plants are literally solar arrays or wind farms paired with typically battery energy storage as well. And because you can obviously store energy from a windmill or a solar panel and then deploy it when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, you can have these VPPs operate a whole lot more like traditional combustion-based power plants, where you can just say, I want this plant to produce 20 megawatts of power 24/7. So I just know I have 20 megawatts and I can rely on it very consistently. A lot of the complaints of renewables have been that they're intermittent. There are times when the sun doesn't shine, obviously. There are times when the wind doesn't blow, obviously. If you pair that with storage, that operating window of when you don't have that power output drops substantially. In some cases, you can drop it to zero if you really need to do that. But, like, we have a pretty established load curve for the grid. Like, you talk to anybody utility and there will be some fluctuations in certain instances, but they have really sophisticated forecasting for that. And as a general rule of thumb, we know when we use power and how much we use. Like, there is decades worth of data available that you can crunch on and be pretty accurate about with that.
Minus 2020.
Yeah, exactly. 2020 is unquestionably an exception in that regard. But like, we don't use as much power in the middle of the night. Obviously, most people are asleep. They don't have anything on. You're not, like, it is advantageous to charge an electric vehicle or run your dishwasher or run your dryer at night, because you can get a time of use rate, and power's dirt cheap in the middle of the night because there's less demand. And so if you have intermittent sources like solar, it's kind of okay that it's not producing power in the middle of the night when demand is lower. We're really getting to the point where we can match supply and demand with intermittent renewable sources a lot more effectively. And again, with battery storage, we can really make it so that VPPs operate just 24/7, producing as much power as we need when we need it. On the battery front, go ahead.
No, it's like, I wanted to, it's like, what are the battery? Because I mean, lithium ion batteries, that's sort of what I hear all the time. Yeah. But I'm wondering, what are the leaps in technology that have been made? And also, my burning question is, like, can we recycle those, or can we reuse those? And the question might be a little ignorant of. No.
This is actually a pretty pressing question that a lot of really smart people have spent a lot of time thinking about as well. You are correct that lithium ion is sort of the big chemistry that's used out there, both for stationary storage and for electric vehicle batteries as well. There are different chemistries that are better suited for certain applications, and I won't go too deep into that because we'll get into some really nerdy chemistry, and I don't necessarily know. I don't know if people would find that terribly interesting, but
we need a graph. We need a graph next time.
I didn't prepare one, so I'm sorry. I'm not, but I can give you a whole battery presentation at some point if you want. But
next time.
Next time, there you go. But so I would say the most common type of chemistry out there, it's called NMC, which is nickel, manganese, cobalt, and it obviously contains those three elements in there. Prices of nickel and cobalt and lithium have all been rising sort of especially in anticipation of greater demand for
Mhm.
stationary energy storage as well as electric vehicles as well. And cobalt is probably the diciest material out there, just in that it has some real potential negative ramifications from mining. Um, and I'll talk about it just briefly because approximately 60% of the entire globe's supply of cobalt is found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One country, more than half of the globe's supply of cobalt. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of mines that may or may not have child labor mining it. And so cobalt is pretty essential in EV batteries right now, but there are many companies, Tesla included, who are moving towards low cobalt or zero cobalt chemistries to sort of move away from some of
No.
the negative human rights
Yeah.
aspects of batteries. And really, like that's one of the sort of the final arguments that fossil fuels have of, them saying, "Oh, look at batteries, they're bad." They have this
Mhm.
cobalt is really sort of one of the last major hurdles that we need to really sort out the human rights ramifications of, to really make it so that there's just no further arguments questioning if batteries are better, because they are. Um, so, um, there, like I said, there are chemistries that are low cobalt or zero cobalt, and that's going to be a trend moving forward in industry as well. There's always, I feel like every week I see some exciting new breakthrough about some lab that's reporting some amazing new battery that's 10 times more powerful and 10 times cheaper, and and super good for the planet, and this, that, and the other. But the fact of the matter is that while there are some exciting things going on in the lab right now to really push the technological edge, the winner is going to be determined by manufacturability. It's great if you can make a cell that does amazing things in test results, but it's quite another to manufacture several billion cells a year that actually work in the real world and stand up to the challenges that EVs and energy storage throw at it as well. And so that's why I really do think that we are going to be on lithium ion for quite a long time, just because the supply chains exist for those materials, the manufacturing know-how exists. Tesla had its battery day recently and obviously made a lot of announcements surrounding manufacturing of batteries and efficiencies there. It's not just them, like realistically, batteries are the commodity of the future for us, especially if we are going to successfully transition to a cleaner future. And being realistic, China's already won that race. China has a fantastic amount of battery manufacturing capability, and they have supply deals with almost all of the major companies who are going to be major users of batteries going forward. South Korea is second. South Korea really, their economy stands to do extremely well in the future because they have LG Chem, Samsung SDI, and SK Innovation, three major, very competent battery manufacturers. They already have multiple plants live throughout the planet, supplying almost everyone. I would say LG Chem has battery supply deals with at least 50% of the global auto manufacturers out there, probably more. Again, I can prepare next time I can prepare
Yeah,
graphs and
it's like
charts
this
and all
is
this,
like, oh
but
my God.
yeah, but I mean, it is a little disappointing that it seems like, with the exception of Tesla, the United States is not really terribly competitive in this market. We have battery manufacturing plants in the United States, not just the Tesla Gigafactory, but they're all owned by either the Chinese or the South Koreans. And so, that race is already sort of, in my mind, determined and won. China is going to win the battery race. But the fact of the matter is that more manufacturing capability anywhere in the world only stands to benefit the transition to a clean energy future, not only for electric cars, which will likely be one of the greatest demand on lithium ion batteries in the future, but also stationary energy storage as well.
Well, and I think that manufacturing, when I hear manufacturing, it's like, how can we bring it locally? Because ultimately, that's not only, good for economy, it's good for job creations. But also going back to your conversation about the why do we have fossil fuel economy? Because there are a lot of subsidies for it. Let's just be clear. I mean, if clean energy was subsidized early on at the rates that fossil fuel economy was subsidized, I mean, we would be completely, leapfrogged so much further along. We would
Maybe.
have levitating mechanisms.
Still not sure about that one, but
Wade and I were joking about it. I was like, well, why do we need, maybe we can leapfrog to levitating mechanisms. And then, my big thing, why I'm sort of like, I'm a dreamer a little bit. So, and it's like, dream big. And sometimes your dreams come true. We don't know what we don't know. So, a long time ago, we couldn't even think about vehicles, 4 wheels. But also, I'm also sort of a little bit different topic, but I love nature. I love animals. I'm a veterinarian by education, and I also grew up in nature. And our whole infrastructure is built with absolute disregard for animal paths, animal migrations. Like if the road blocks access to the river, there's no way for wildlife to get to water. So we don't think about infrastructure incorporating nature and other beings on this planet. So I was like, well, levitating, yes, of course, we're going to be colliding with birds and the bees and the butterflies, but still, it's we don't have physical roads on the ground. So anyway,
I would say electric and autonomous vehicles are certainly going to be features of our lifetimes, but flying cars, I'm not quite sure about. I will say, on your nature piece, I have seen plenty of freeways where they do intentionally build nature bridges over a freeway or nature tunnels underneath that are designed to let animals cross either over or under. Is that commonly implemented? No. Is it largely an afterthought? Yes, but it does exist. I would like to see it exist more, but that does exist out there.
To your point, I think in Europe it actually exists more than in the United States.
Europe is more progressive than the United States on many things, and I would agree that's likely one of them.
Yeah. Well, so what is your, I want to know about the software application, because I think it's such an important also part of the technology and part of bringing people on board. Can you talk a little bit about your software
Sure.
company?
So I was a co-founder along with a friend of mine who I met at Tesla. And there was a couple things we were trying to do there. One was we were working on a smartphone app that helped people find charging stations. And there are plenty of companies that exist out there. The one that's sort of been the most prominent one that has really captured a lot of market share was created many years ago. I'm actually friends with the founder of that company, and we briefly worked together at a different company together as well. He worked at Tesla in early days. I want to say like 2008 as well. So we've been interested in some similar places throughout our careers. But we were just trying to make one that was a little bit more user friendly, was a little less first adoptery. The existing app that is still the dominant market player out there, I use it all the time, and it's easy for me to understand because I'm a technologist and an early adopter and interested in learning these sorts of stuff. But you can tell it was built by engineers. And so we were trying to build something that was a little bit more user friendly. And then we also had a scheduling tool for large tech companies, because a problem that is pretty unique to the Bay Area, but that will become a problem throughout other parts of the United States and the rest of the world as well, is that there will be this period where there will be sort of more cars than chargers. Like I've worked for a number of companies that have all worked with the big tech companies out there. And you see this at the headquarters of Google and Facebook and Apple and all these tech titans, where, you'll have this parking lot that has 50 EV chargers in it. When you think, oh my God, that's fantastic. That's the future. That's what every parking lot's going to look like. But then when you realize that there's 300 EVs trying to park in that parking lot, 50 EV chargers is woefully not enough. And so, this is a problem, again, that is sort of unique to California and Silicon Valley, and to some degree, these big tech companies, because I would say employees of the big tech companies drive electric vehicles at much higher rates than other segments of the population. But so we had developed a scheduling tool to basically sort of, analyze your calendar, figure out when you had meetings, and schedule the time for you to go out to the parking lot and plug in or unplug your car and move your car, so that you can get as much efficiency out of, one station. Instead of charging one car a day, it charges 2 or 3 cars a day, and everybody gets the benefit they're seeking without having to pump in a bunch of extra money into additional infrastructure in the ground. So that's what the idea was. And this was back in 2017, and I can just tell you we were way too early to market. Like we ran out of money pretty quickly. But I think the idea is sound, and one of the companies I worked for most recently solved it in a different way, in that we had mobile chargers that you could deploy, where it was literally like shopping cart size devices that had a Tesla's worth of energy in them. And so you can literally wheel those out into a parking lot and go charge a car anywhere in the parking lot. And then in the evening, when everybody goes home, you wheel those to the, those now empty batteries to the chargers that nobody's using, because nobody's parked in the Google parking lot between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. So, you just wheel them back, you recharge them there. So you could functionally double your infrastructure without actually putting anything additional into the ground. And that was pretty cool, because a lot of these parking lots, like if you build a charger in there that's concrete into the ground, that's a sunk investment. If you stop leasing that property and move offices, like you're not going to rip those out and take them with you. That's a sunk cost. So it was a really sort of effective way of
that's excellent. It's a wow. I'm fascinated with that sort of.
Well, check out FreeWire Technologies. That's the company I worked for up until recently, and that's what they did. And yeah, it was a pretty, it was a tech solution, and batteries are expensive, but it was a very neat way of allowing people to expand infrastructure without actually trenching and doing a lot of expensive construction in the ground and pouring concrete.
Well, but also I'm thinking, my recent experiences with electric vehicles. So I told you one that we really could not buy an electric vehicle because we lived in an apartment building that didn't have charging stations. So it was like, well, where are we going to charge it? But also, a lot of municipalities obviously adapting laws that create the infrastructure. Like in Oakland, for example, where I work in politics, now all the buildings have to be, all the parking spaces have to be EV ready, electric vehicle charging stations ready, and certain percentage should be actually equipped with the technology. So it's a smart solution in my mind, because technologies develop constantly, so you don't know how the next plug charging station might look like. But also, creating that infrastructure. So, and also, in the relationship to your to the app idea, we used, my friend and I were driving. He was driving, and we couldn't find a station. We found few stations that were in parking lots, and parking lots were closed after some hours. Like, well, that's not use if it's not identified within the app that this is, in the locked parking lot. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So
speaking about infrastructure in that regard as well, what I can say is that you are not alone whatsoever in being in the predicament of, I want an EV, but I live in an apartment building, and so how can I make this work? There are a number of companies out there who are specifically focusing on multi-unit dwellings for EV chargers. That there's a lot of time and effort and money being put into solving that problem. And there are some good solutions out there. There genuinely are. I think, one of the biggest challenges that we see there is getting landlords on board to say, yes, I value this. I'm willing to spend some money on this for my tenants, but it's a revenue stream I can coop back. I can, EV drivers tend to be wealthier. I can, I can get wealthier clients. And there's a whole lot of selling points associated with that, but it absolutely is a problem that people are working on. And the flip side to that is that there will always be apartment buildings that just don't have EV chargers. And having driven an EV for 6 years now, and having driven
Tesla?
I have a couple of Teslas, yes. But
Nice.
but I've driven non-Tesla vehicles as well, and there is a difference in experience. And you know, like that's not meant to be a positive or negative comment. It just is the nature of, you know, of the situation. But you know, there are a lot of companies that are focusing on building out networks of fast charging stations so
Mhm.
that people like you who don't have access to home charging can still drive an electric vehicle. And I will say, in my personal experience, the ability to plug in at night and charge, you know, at home is the best, most convenient way of refueling your vehicle. It's fantastic. So if it's doable for you, great. That should always be option one. But you know, there are thousands of fast chargers out there in the United States right now that really do allow someone like you who lives in an apartment building to drive an electric vehicle. And that's true for both Teslas and non-Tesla vehicles as well. You know, a Volkswagen Group, they a couple years back had that diesel cheating emissions scandal, Dieselgate.
Mhm.
Um, and part of their penance is said, instead of just paying a bunch of fines to the state, we want you to keep $2 billion that we normally would have forced you to pay us. And we want you to build a comprehensive charging station network. And
Right.
that's what Electrify America is. And Electrify America has had teething problems. You know, like their costs are a bit high, and some of their stations don't function the way they should. But Electrify America has put in thousands of stations into the ground remarkably quickly, and that's what we need. And a lot of these stations are located in areas that you were going to go to anyways, like
Yeah.
grocery stores. And I have to say, you know, I mean, I'm spoiled for infrastructure here. In addition to having a home charger, I have 3 Tesla superchargers within a 5-mile radius of my house. But one of them is at a Target. Another is at a Whole Foods. Guess what? I shop in those places. And so there have been plenty of times where I said, oh, the car's kind of running low. I need to go grocery shopping as well. We're going to Whole Foods. And I can, in 30 minutes of shopping in Whole Foods, I can easily add back 200 miles of range on my car. And that's more than sufficient. And there's even been some times where I had to be sort of quickly in and out in 10, 15 minutes. And I only got 120 or 150 miles of range. I don't drive that much every day. You know, like this idea that you always have to fill up to 100% and stay as long as you need to fill up to 100%. It's just not true. I mean, like there have been plenty of times where I've gone and I said, great, I have 150 miles of range. You know, like that's more than enough for the next day or two of driving that I need. And I need to go now. So we're off. You know, like it's, you know, it is definitely a different paradigm and way of thinking about your fuel, but there unquestionably are options out there. You know, home charging is great. Fast charging in the public domain works.
Yeah. Well, and it also takes a little bit more planning, honestly,
It
with
does.
electrical vehicles, just because, and again, planning, not because they're any different. I mean, if you run out of fuel, you need a gas station to
Mhm.
fuel. And so
Yep.
it's just planning because the infrastructure is not there. And of course, what I'm also thinking is like, how do we how do we make sure that electrical vehicles are accessible to everybody
Yep.
in California and in the world, and not just to, affluent classes and
Yep.
people who can pay for them? How
Yep.
can we make that clean economy available to everybody,
Yep.
regardless of their income, and where they live?
Yep.
So that's another big sort of undertaking and hurdle. And it's like, I think that the companies that investing in apartment buildings, I think is also extremely important because, not everybody can afford a house.
Yep. No, totally. And I can say that costs are unquestionably coming down as well. You know, I mean, like the Chevy Bolt, even though it has an MSRP in the high $30,000 range, the actual price you're going to pay at the dealership level is in the mid $25,000 range.
MSRP,
Yes,
sorry.
yes, with a B. Yeah. Bolt, B is in Bravo.
No, 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 no. But MSRP, what is the?
Sorry. MSRP is the manufacturer suggested retail price. So that's the sticker price, if you will. The price you actually pay is quite a bit lower than that. But also, you know, I'm not trying to turn this into a Volkswagen commercial, but Volkswagen is absolutely working on compelling electric vehicles at Volkswagen expected prices. And, you know, there is a pretty substantial $7,500 federal tax credit available on most EVs out there. GM and Tesla have sold enough cars that that's sunsetted for them, so the discounts aren't there for them. But like I said, you know, I mean, like you can get a Bolt for $10,000 under list price all day nowadays, because GM understands that that's the price point that vehicle will sell at. And if you try and sell it at 37,000, there's better vehicles that people will buy instead.
Yeah.
So
and it goes back to incentives and subsidies.
yeah, totally. It absolutely, like government incentives absolutely help this. You know, I've purchased multiple new electric vehicles in my time, and I got a pretty sizable government check to do that in each instance, and that helped quite a bit. But you know, on the equity piece of making EVs more affordable for all, you know, there are newer EVs that are coming out that are at lower price points. The tax incentives do help quite a bit as well, but also just, you know, I've been in the EV industry for basically my entire career, and so I'm familiar with this, but we are still unquestionably in the very early days of all of this. Less than 2% of all vehicles sold in the United States come with a plug right now. So we have a long 2%. Yeah, we have a long way to go. But I can also just say that the more supply that we have, the more EVs are going to be just available to other people. There are a lot of people out there where buying a new car of any powertrain source is just not an option for them. If your budget's $15,000, there's virtually zero vehicles available at that price point new in the United States. So you're pretty much, you know, you have to buy a used EV. And that's why it's great. Just the more EVs we can manufacture, even if they're expensive up front, those will be substantially cheaper 3 to 5 years from now. And while I'm not trying to force used EVs on people who have lower incomes, electric vehicles last a lot longer than gas powered vehicles. You know, I have a 2012 Tesla Model S, so it's 8 years old. It was one of the first 500 ever manufactured, and I have 120,000 miles on it. And many people in a gas car, they'd be saying like, okay, this is starting to get towards the end of life, and I have to start to expect there's going to be more maintenance on this vehicle because it's old. And that's just not true in an electric vehicle. You know, I mean, like your biggest running expense is tires. It really is. You know, like there's no air filters to replace. There's no oil to change. There's no fan belts that can snap that you have to redo. Like it just, you know, the maintenance costs of electric vehicles are substantially lower than they are for gas cars. And the realistic lifetime of electric vehicles is also substantially longer. I'm obviously a battery and electric vehicle nerd. I looked at a number of studies that polled sort of battery degradation on Model S's just because they've been around for a while. And there were thousands of data points from dozens of countries and almost every climate that humans inhabit imaginable. And the averages from this data set ended up saying that for a Model S battery to degrade 20%, which is considered end of life, is when it degrades 20%. So that basically, you know, like if you're getting 250 miles new, you're now getting 200 miles on a full charge instead, which is still very useful. But in order for a Model S battery to degrade to that point where it was 20% degraded, on average, you had to drive 510,000 miles to get to that point. And most gas vehicles won't make it that long, just full stop. And again, that's for the battery just to degrade 20%, you know, so you've still got a lot of useful energy available in it.
Still got 80% on the battery, basically.
Yeah, but you know, but realistically, to drive, you know, 500,000 miles in a single vehicle, if you look at the averages of how far people typically drive in a year, that's going to take in excess of 30 years. Few people keep their cars for that long. But what I'm saying is that this idea is that, you know, like in the future, there will be many electric vehicles out there that might be 20 plus years old and have 3, 4, 500,000 miles on them. And like, those are not close to end of life. Those can continue to operate very reliably, very cheaply for an insane amount of time. You know, I've been involved in fleet management before, and the operating costs over long periods of time are wild in that combustion is not competitive. You know, it's just not. Like order of magnitude more expensive to maintain a fleet of gas vehicles over multiple decades than EVs. It's not close.
I love this. And I think that unfortunately we'll have to close on that point, which is a great point to close on.
Yeah.
When we need to get, some stats for, climate action plan or something for municipality, I know who to call now.
Yeah, yeah. I say I'm happy to put together a presentation deck or get you some spreadsheets or graphs.
Yeah, well, because it is, so it's like, what is the cost analysis? And it's like, there's a lot of, I think, education, a lot of hesitation, that goes into those adopting new technologies. But also, I don't want to make it, income based. Also, I think that there's a whole philosophy that is just not a good investment to buy a new vehicle, because, the moment you
That's
have a lot,
true across the board. Yeah.
exactly, immediately drops in price. So I think
Mhm.
that in many ways it's just smart economic decision for
To get a
anybody
used
to be
vehicle, period. Yeah,
able to
I
hold
agree
a
with that.
vehicle. Yeah,
That is
unless you're really a vehicle nerd and you have money and you collecting, or you like the smell of a new whatever
Mhm.
interior. But wait, I mean I can continue that kind
Mhm.
a couple hours. It's been interesting, and I have many more questions about infrastructure. We didn't, really go into infrastructure in parks, which I'm still very interested to find out what the sort of ideas there. And um, good luck with your endeavors. I
Thank
hope
you.
we stay in touch. I hope, one of those days I will get my own Tesla, used or not.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Anything, I mean, I think the point that you made last was excellent point, but if you
Yeah.
want to just a couple sentences
Yeah.
to.
I mean, I do, I will end on that point just because I think that that is a succinct way of explaining one of the many reasons why EVs are just better. But, like if you want me back on at some point with a little bit more data, I'm happy to do that. I have lived a lot of the experiences that I've talked about here. My side hustle is an electric vehicle rental car company. So I do have 2 Teslas that I literally rent out to people. And I have
That's
multiple
why.
I have multiple years worth of data on that. So like I really can, like, you want me to talk about costs. I have spreadsheets where I track all of this because that's my business. So yeah, like I can say that if people wanted detailed numbers on this, yeah, I have years worth of data. And again, like I have an 8-year-old car with 120,000 miles on it that is still will outperform most new vehicles today, period. And I'm expecting a minimum of 300 to 400,000 miles out of that car. So long way to go.
Well, thank you for being a resource. I hope that people will take you up on that. And actually, I'm already thinking, I was like, well, I need to connect you with this person, that person for various
I'll
reasons.
send you a link for my rental platform. You can put it in the comments.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate you and appreciate your work. And thank you everybody for joining us again. I hope that was informative. I hope you learned a lot and, would like to implement or maybe contact Wade for a Tesla rental. I'm
Yeah.
already thinking now.
Well, thank you very much for having me today, Olga. This has been great. And again, happy to be a resource moving forward as well.
Thank you. And until next Friday, everybody, tune in to In the Know, and you will be in the know on many subjects. Wait, if you can stay for just a couple more minutes.
Sure.
Okay, bye, everybody. Have a great week.